Hello, everyone. Dr. Jane here. The conversation we're having today is on trauma and the brain. Welcome to the channel, and I hope you're going to enjoy this video. I am Dr. Jane, and I am your favorite psychologist. I wanted us to explore the difference between trauma and neglect. Trauma is defined as an experience that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. And the result of that sense of overwhelm can be emotional, cognitive, and physiological dysregulation. All of them, or some of them, or one of them. Trauma is not limited to a single event. It can be chronic or repeated, such as ongoing neglect or abuse. And its impact depends on how the individual experiences the event. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say we're walking down in the mall, and as we're walking, there was an incident that occurred in the mall. All of us are in this space observing the same situation and the same thing. However, each one of us is going to internalize that experience differently, and we are going to respond differently to the situation or that experience. And this is what makes trauma interesting, because not everyone responds the same to the traumatic event. Um, the other thing about trauma is that trauma can affect brain development, stress response, as well as long-term mental health, sorry, as opposed to neglect. Neglect is the persistent failure of a care provider to meet a child's basic physical, emotional, psychological needs, such as food, shelter, supervision, medical care, and emotional support. Neglect can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be educational, or it can be medical in nature. But unlike abuse, where you have the physical signs and you can say, okay, this person is experiencing some sort of abuse. Neglect is harder to pinpoint, because then there are those physical signs that are present. Neglect can also occur even when caregivers are physically present but fail to respond to a child's emotional or developmental needs. This is where sometimes you have an adult in the home, or you have a parent in the home that is physically present but emotionally absent. And when we look at individuals who are experiencing either trauma or neglect, we can see where it has long-term implications in the person's lives and in their ability to navigate the world, in their ability to cope, in their ability to regulate their emotions. Now, we've talked about the prefrontal cortex. I did another video on this. So this is just a brief overview, because these three parts of the brain are so essential to executive functions. We talked about that: planning, judgment, reasoning, and so forth. And our amygdala, hippocampus, both of those are essential in terms of social interaction emotional regulation, memory, and so forth. In the individual who's experiencing trauma, we see where there's an elevation of the brain chemicals due to stress. Um, we also see an elevation in cortisol caused by activities, stressful activities. And we also see where, because here's the thing, let me give you an example. Let's say we're looking at a child where one or two of the parents are an alcoholic, or they're some sort of addiction, or their domestic violence in the home. And this is the child's constant daily experience. The child will live in a state of elevated cortisol levels because they're living in a state of constant stress due to the parents' state of either alcoholic abuse or drugs or whatever the parent is dealing with that impacts the child. This again is another kind of, this is the same three parts, but the vein here is different. In the prefrontal cortex, we have rational thinking. This is a major part of consciousness. It's a major part of judgment. It's a major part of where we conceptualize ideas and thoughts and so forth. It is also what is present in conjunction with the amygdala to regulate our emotions. When we look at individuals who have PTSD, their prefrontal cortex, the size is smaller. And whenever we talk about the size of a brain being, or an area of the brain being smaller, it limits the person's capacity for what they can and cannot do. And so in neuroscience and cognitive science, when we talk about either the brain is smaller, or it alters the architecture of the brain, or the chemistry is altered, what does that mean? When we're talking about the size of the brain, they're average sizes. And so when a person experiences trauma, they experience neglect, especially extreme neglect, you will see a vast difference in the size of the brain of those people. Individuals who experience trauma and neglect, sometimes their brain is not the average size that it's supposed to be, right? So that's one piece. When we're talking about the architecture of the brain, we are talking about how the brain is built, right? Let's say we walk into a house and you see this nice vaulted ceiling and this open floor plan compared to a house that is a condo. And so it doesn't have the vaulted ceiling, and it doesn't have the I don't know, it's not a high-end condo, right? So it's a basic place. They're two different architecture. When we talk about that idea to the brain, the architecture of the brain, how was the brain put together? Because that also impacts personality, behavior, what the person can and cannot do, what they how they think, their capacity. And this is important when we're thinking about their perceptual depth and their depth of thought and their ability to piece ideas and information together. Um, in Specifically for the hippocampus, in trauma, for some people who experience trauma, the hippocampus sometimes shrink and it gets smaller. And so this is why when you ask someone about the trauma that they experience, well, tell me what happened. They're like, I don't know, I don't remember. Because sometimes they simply lack the ability to do so at that moment. And there may be gaps in their memory because then their capacity for memory shrunk as a result of the trauma, especially when it is prolonged, extended trauma. Now, our amygdala, this is a special piece here, and this is the one in yellow. It is wired for our survival. When active, it is hard to think rationally. The more hyperactive the amygdala is, the more signs of PTSD that is present. Again, PTSD just doesn't happen in service members. We see PTSD in law enforcement, individuals who experience domestic violence, individuals who live in high crime neighborhoods. Okay. This is another one for trauma and the brain, and I wanted to talk about the thalamus. The thalamus, you guys, that's here, it's in the center of the brain, and it's a relay center. And it relays our sensory information. Chronic and complex trauma change the thalamus in two very important ways. The brain begins to think things are threatening, even if they're not, because now the brain have been in this constant elevated state of trauma, threat, and stress for an extended period of time. And so it changes the individual's way of looking at a threatening situation, because now it's like the person is stuck. The second way that trauma changes our thalamus, the brain begins to miss actual threats of danger. It becomes difficult for them to sense harm. There is the continued, again, the same idea of this continued elevated or presence of stress or threat. The brain loses its ability to tell the difference between the two. Now, there is that continued adrenaline release. This is our fight or flight chemical. And if you want more with regards to our neurotransmitters and body chemicals, you can look at the video that I did on neurotransmitters. Continued adrenaline release makes it difficult for the person who's in the situation to form accurate memories. And so this is why it's really difficult. And so, therapy is important, journaling is important, having a stable loving environment for our children is important, and so that they don't experience this dysregulation of their nervous system. Now, in trauma and brain development, I did another video with this part here. Remember this word, this is a neuron, and it's a building block of our nervous system. And this is a big deal because then these are the building blocks and the components of our nervous system. Trauma does a lot to a person. When a developing brain processes consistent violence or trauma, the building blocks, these neuron receptors cannot make healthy connections. They can't, because then they've been existing in this constant, consistent, elevated state of stress, violence, trauma, and so forth. There's increased heart rate and the development of cardiovascular abnormalities. As human beings, we are not designed to experience and dwell under such stress for extended periods of time. Okay? It programs the brain to signal to the body to respond in a hypervigilant and unpredictable pattern. So, what does all of this mean in terms of how it manifests for us? I have two triangles here. One is upside down and one is right side up. In typical development of the child, you look at the bottom, there is survival, there's regulation, social and emotional, cognition, and as a person grows and develops, their cognition grows and develops. That is normal development. But in developmental trauma, you see where the cognition is very small. That's the purple tip of the triangle, because the person is in survival mode. The bottom of this pyramid or triangle here is survival. And so they're in survival mode so long. There is this constant regulation over and over and over. Their social emotional, their ability to cope and to do that, it's stunted. And their cognition, that is also stunted as well. If you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you have any comments, please comment. Thank you for watching the video. I am Dr. Jane, and I'm your favorite psychologist.